Welcome to Eternal Dread, where fear never sleeps. Tell us where you're watching from, and what time it is, because terror has no limits. If you're brave enough, share and comment, but beware, something might be watching you too. Now, turn off the lights, and let the dread begin. The worst part about insomnia is the boredom. Nothing open except for the seedy places. Nobody awake except for the seedy people. Nothing to do except watch movies and eat sunflower seeds. Seriously, fuck insomnia. My sleep capacity generally comes and goes in waves, but the few weeks before I found Hal's were especially rough. There was no inciting incident, just that general feeling of restlessness and anxiety that has become a familiar friend over the years. I tried all of the standard assists, warm milk, old movies, cut down on my caffeine intake. All the usual things that people recommend but never work. Eventually, more out of boredom than anything else, I took to taking late-night walks through the city. I worked a shitty job as a projectionist at a local movie theater, and on the weekends I didn't often get off work until the last movie finished, and the city had long since wound down by the time I was free. The first week or two I stayed towards the well-lit areas populated by the intoxicated, both rich and poor. But while the people watching was always good, I quickly grew tired of the relentless noise and began wandering off the beaten path. I'm not sure how I'd never noticed Hal's before. I distinctly remembered buying smokes at the dilapidated gas station across the street on several occasions, and I'm sure my eyes would have been drawn to the large storefront windows still brightly lit and welcoming at 3 a.m. The neon sign pronouncing it Hal's low-cost thrift and consignment glowed in garishly conflicting colors, except for the first S, which was burnt out. Of course I would come to realize that there were very good reasons I had never seen it before, but that first night I wondered if maybe I was hallucinating from sleep deprivation. I entered, of course, even if I didn't feel the need to validate that the whole thing wasn't just a figment of my imagination. There was no way I was denying my curiosity. It was probably the smell that I noticed first, kind of a combination of burning sage and rancid meat, but in a weirdly good kind of way. Best thing I can compare it to is a beach bonfire at low tide. The place was packed full of merchandise, all displayed very neatly on row after row of shelving, but without any sign of clear organization. Knickknacks sat on the same shelves as old magazines and jumper cables. A bizarre collection of artwork decorated the walls, from shadow boxes holding sports paraphernalia to Pink Floyd posters to copies of famous Impressionist paintings. The wall furthest from the front entrance was actually just an unbroken line of doors. Each door was crafted in an entirely different style, and each painted a different color to create a full-length pride flag along the wall. In the center, the green door actually appeared to be an elevator, which really just raised additional questions. I began to browse the first aisle to the left of the front door. A full silver-plated dining set, a clown costume, a chainsaw without a chain for cookbooks, a Super Soaker XP 100 already filled with water, several fake antique-looking religious relics such as crosses and Buddha heads, and a full-length evening cloak that made me immediately start contemplating a career as a supervillain if for no other reason than I would look amazing in it. I browsed several more aisles with a bemused smile on my face as the truly eclectic inventory continued to defy any clear organizational sense, until a gruff voice cleared its throat. I glanced up to see the shopkeeper behind the front counter staring at me. He was a medium-sized man, but held a clear "don't fuck with me" aura around him. His head was shaved bald, and his arms and shoulders indicated someone who had spent more than a few years working in trades. "Can I help you find something?" he asked, his voice a low grumble that ran the line between professionalism and wanting to throw your ass to the curb. I shot him one of my patented disarming smiles. "Not really, I'm just browsing." He continued to stare for a moment, his eyes probing as if searching for a way to sort me into one of the Jungian archetypes that all retail employees have for their customers. "Incubus?" he asked finally. "Excuse me? Are you an incubus?" he responded, his eyes still searching mine. "No, Gemini, actually. Well, on the cusp with Cancer, really. I didn't think people actually used the astrology pickup in real life. I gotta ask, do you get a lot of success with that one? With nostalgia being all the rage these days, going for one of the classic pickup lines is actually a brilliant idea. The corner of the man's mouth twitched just for a moment before returning to its painted-on scowl. That immediately put me at ease. Couldn't work the late-night shift without having that hard shell of an exterior, but if I could touch a sense of humor, he probably wouldn't be throwing me out anytime soon. I don't get a lot of people coming in here just to browse, he said, his voice having moved slightly away from the gravelly grumble he was using before. Less Bob Dylan, more Bob's Burgers. Most know exactly what they want by the time they lay eyes on this place. I shrugged. What can I say? I'm an impulsive sort. Hey, how much is this? I lifted up a snow globe that held what looked like a large hospital. The shopkeeper raised an eyebrow. Good eye. That's $200. I whistled, immediately placing it carefully back on the rack. Pricey for a paperweight. Collector's item. There are a lot of stories inside that little snow globe. You could probably get a couple thousand from the right buyer if you're fine dealing with that kind of person. I take it since you're selling it for $200, you're not fine with that? The corner of the shopkeeper's mouth twitched again. I could tell he was warming to me. I'm pretty sure you're not here for that old thing anyways. What am I here for then? I'm not sure yet. Keep browsing, I'm sure you'll find it. I did as I was told. An antique set of writing quills, what looked like a defunct Tesla coil, a compass and a sextant, a typewriter, a VCR, a few old board games I had never heard of, and a few other Raggedy children's toys, including an actual Raggedy Ann doll. Nothing really struck my fancy until I was flipping through a rack of clothing and came across a treasure. I delightedly snatched it up and approached the front counter, placing it in front of the shopkeeper. He raised another eyebrow at me, and I beamed a smile at him in return. I've always wanted one of these. I chortled. The shopkeep shook his head and pressed a few buttons on the archaic register. Not Fay then. Never met a Fay with a decent sense of humor. For the white t-shirt with "I'm with stupid" written on it, that'll be $1.53. I fished a handful of coins out of my pocket and counted out exact change. He took it and sorted the money into the correct slots. He looked back up at me and shook his head. This has got to be the dumbest sale I've made this year. I'm not even sure why that was on the rack. Hey, I'm not complaining, I said, pulling the new purchase over the shirt I was already wearing. Did you just open? I walk by this area pretty often, and I'm sure I've never seen you here before. The man's smile came out fully into the open. Yes and no. We've been in business for a long time, but I guess you could say we're new to the area. Well, I hope you stick around for a while, Hal, I said, nodding with feigned understanding as I extended my hand. You've got a bunch of weird shit in here, and there aren't many other places for me to go shopping at this time of night. Butch, the shopkeeper replied, shaking my outstretched hand. Excuse me? My name's Butch, not Hal. What the hell would the owner be doing working the front counter at 3 a.m.? I threw my head back and laughed. I stand corrected. Butch grinned. So not an incubus, not a fae, not a vamp. What the hell are you doing in my shop? I raised an eyebrow. Buying vintage clothing, apparently. No, seriously, what's your deal? Shapeshifter? Wendigo? Cannibal? Dude, I've worked enough retail to know all about the normal customer archetypes, but I think you've lost me on these. Is a shapeshifter one of those shoplifters who keeps showing up in different clothes like they're actually fooling anyone? Butch looked at me in perplexity, but a little bell rang announcing the arrival of another customer before he could continue his line of questioning. We both glanced towards the door instinctually, and I suddenly also began wondering what the hell I was doing in this store. The woman who had just entered was tall, disturbingly tall. At least that was my first impression. I soon realized, though, that she wasn't actually tall. She was just floating a solid 2 feet off the ground. She wore a long, pale white and semi-transparent dress that fell clearly past her feet and dragged gently on the floor. A white veil was pinned to her unkempt mane of dark hair and spread across her face. That veil did nothing to disguise the bloodshot and sorrowful eyes, the broken nose, nor the mouth that hung open to the center of her chest, leaving a large black void from her cracked and broken top teeth to well past her neck. I recoiled in horror, slipping and falling directly onto my ass before scooting myself back until my back hit a rack of shelves and a hairy, taxidermied hand fell onto my lap. I held it up in preparation to do battle should I need to. The specter, however, paid me absolutely no mind. She merely glided down one of the aisles, raised her hand to delicately select something off a shelf, and then floated back up to Butch's counter. "Evening, Maeve." "Just the usual," Butch asked casually. The woman's cavernous mouth seemed to open wider, and a reverberating moan began to vibrate my soul. It wasn't loud, but it suddenly reminded me of the sound I heard my mother make over my grandfather's deathbed when I was 9 years old. "All right, gorgeous, it's 450. The woman in white reached out a hand limply and dropped a handful of crumpled bills on the counter. She then turned and slowly glided out of the door. My shaking hands continued to point the furry limb at her long past the point she was out of sight. "Throat lozenges," stated Butch. I swept the leg to point at him, my heart still racing and my eyes wide. Butch seemed unconcerned. "Maeve comes in every night for a pack. Her work leaves her throat pretty sore. I'm not sure if they do much good, but it's always the regulars who keep a business afloat." That was a fucking banshee. I almost screamed. Butch's eyebrows raised as though impressed. "Wow," he said. "I'm impressed. Most humans wouldn't recognize one on sight." "Hey, could you stop pointing that thing at me? They can get a little unpredictable if you're not used to them." I kept my impromptu weapon trained on him for another moment before allowing my hand, still tightly clenched, to fall into my lap. I continued to breathe shakily for another moment and tried to get my head straight. "I'm sorry," I said once I felt like I could speak without screaming. "That was really not something I expected to see tonight." "What the fuck, Butch? Banshees are fucking real. And they come in here every night for pharyngitis treatment. What the fuck is this place?" I realized my voice was starting to gain volume again. I stopped, swallowed, and took another raspy breath. "Sorry," I said again. I've never reacted well when I get really scared. Believe me, I wish that didn't happen to me, but dash. The thing still clasped in my hand suddenly lurched. I curiously glanced down at it, only just then fully noticing what I had been clenching in my fist. "Fuck, this is a monkey's paw, isn't it?" "Yeah, you may want to put that down before you make another wish," said Butch, an amused smile on his face. "Why, what did I say? Still scared?" "Of what?" "Oh, right, ugly banshee chick." "Nah, I'm good now." "Why do my pants smell bad?" Butch rolled his eyes. "Go ahead and grab a new pair. No charge." "Nice. Can I use your bathroom?" He nodded towards the far wall of the shop. "Purple door. I'd avoid opening any others if I were you." "Spoil sport. Is that elevator real?" "Yep. And no, I'm not answering any follow-up questions until I can't smell you anymore." 10 minutes later, I was feeling much cleaner, if slightly chilly, in my newly bought I'm with stupid t-shirt and newly gifted come slut booty shorts. I must have been starting to grow on Butch, because other than another twitch of his mouth and slight shake of his head, he didn't much react to my change in style. "So you're actually just straight human, aren't you?" he asked ruefully. I can't think of another species that would so flagrantly disregard their own self-respect. Never seen the video of the otter raping a decapitated fish head, have you? You know what I mean. Even the blood orgy folk will still show up in something tailored at least. "Butch, you just had a floating girl in here wearing funeral clothes." "Versace. Maeve's taste is old-fashioned, but always quality." I paused with my mouth open, before shutting it slowly. "All right then. I guess I stand corrected. Should I change so I don't offend the blood orgy folk?" I finally got a full laugh from Butch. "What's your name, kid?" "Clear." "Sorry?" "Clear. Middle name is Water. My parents were hippies, also big fans of revivals. Man, thought I drew the short straw when it came to names, but you've got me beat." "So what?" The shop bell rang again. Unlike with the previous customer, I felt not even the slightest twinge of fear as the latest monster strolled casually into the building. 6.5 feet tall and covered in reddish-brown fur, the man with the overtly canine face was sporting a cordial grin. The werewolf nodded casually at Butch and began strolling the aisles. Butch nodded back and then raised an eyebrow at me, as though interested in my newfound stoicism. "Well," he asked, as if unsure whether or not I was going to shit myself again, "I can't believe you gave me a hard time about my booty shorts and then didn't blink at that guy dropping werewolf dong." Butch grunted in satisfaction. "Guess that monkey's paw was the real deal. I should bump up the price." "You didn't know?" He shook his head. "It's good policy not to fuck around with a monkey's paw." Had a feeling it was legit, though. A lot of the other stuff we got from that particular estate ended up being pretty extraordinary. There was a pause. Such as? I demanded. Come on, dude, you can't drop that line and then not show off a bit. Butch laughed again and turned around to the display wall behind the counter. He pulled down a shadow box and laid it on the counter in front of me. Inside was an almost cartoonishly large revolver. 6-chamber, but with a bulbous barrel that could have fired a skee-ball. There were 3 huge rounds already loaded, but with no caliber that I recognized. You seem like the kind of guy who would appreciate this. He opened the case and gestured for me to pick it up. I did, immediately surprised by its apparent weightlessness. I spun it around my finger, gunslinger style, and leveled it harmlessly towards the doors at the end of the hall. The werewolf glanced up at me curiously for a moment before returning to his shopping. Love the way it handles, but I don't recognize the make. One of a kind, Butch said. They call it the Chekhov gun. I laughed. Seriously? Guess I have to fire it then, huh? Probably, but I wouldn't waste the ammo if you don't have to. Those 3 rounds are all there are left. How very hackneyed, I said, examining one of the rounds. These things seem a bit unnecessary, unless you're hunting kaiju. What are they? I've just taken to calling them MacGuffins. I've only seen it used once, during a debate over the bathroom being only for paying customers. One thing led to another, and a full army of vampires ended up laying siege to the shop. Had to have been at least 400 or 500 of them. Hal shot off a round from this, and it fired an actual sun. Gave me 2nd-degree burns on every exposed inch of skin, but it fried every last one of those fuckers. Wait, it shoots a sun? I asked incredulously, cautiously setting the gun back on the counter. No, it shoots whatever it has to get the job done, Butch explained. That makes no sense whatsoever. You do realize there's a werewolf browsing through old Megadeth CDs 10 feet behind you, right? I turned around and locked eyes with the large hairy fellow for a moment. His tongue lolled out of the side of his mouth in a wolfish smile, and he winked at me. I mean, I get what you're saying, but I still think there's a big difference between ancient legends and a relatively modern literary construct. Butch opened his mouth to respond, but at that moment the door slammed open with enough force to cause the lights to flicker. I glanced over my shoulder at the darkened doorway, noticing Butch's hand move to rest lightly on the Chekhov gun on the counter. The werewolf's hackles raised as a low growl began to rumble from his direction. The man in the doorway seemed human enough. If high-stakes lawyers could be considered human, that is. He was tall, but not intimidatingly so. His suit was well-tailored, his hair immaculate. The charming smile on his face belied the cold contempt in his eyes. "Hey, Butch," he said, his voice a purring baritone. "Hey, AZ, long time no see," Butch replied, his face devoid of emotion. "Way too long." The man pulled a coin from his pocket and began rolling it back and forth across his fingers. "Is your boss around?" "You know I haven't seen Hal in months, AZ. Not since that incident with the Purgatory delegation. Paychecks are still rolling in though, so he's out there somewhere. If you find him, let him know I'm taking the Fender for a Christmas bonus." AZ shook his head in feigned disappointment. "It really would be in your best interest to help me track him down, Butch. You know the deal he made to run this place expired at the end of last month. Now my employer has a lot of respect for the old man and everything he's done over the years, so he's more than willing to renegotiate the terms." Butch shook his head. "You're not hearing me, AZ. I don't know where the guy is, and I don't have any way of getting a hold of him." "Come on, you really mean to tell me your boss can't SUS out where he is?" I'm starting to get why his little rebellion failed. Still not sure how he duped all you idiots into following his lead, though. Was that like a Trump thing? AZ's eyes narrowed. "That's low even for you, Butch." I laughed involuntarily. "I dunno, man, if the mega hat fits." Suddenly a force slammed into me, hurling me over the counter and against the wall behind the register. Shock shuddered through my body as a display hook pierced my shoulder. A flood of moisture spread down my back, and I immediately started feeling a little woozy. Also a lot pissed. I jerked my head up to glare at AZ. "Motherfucker, I just bought this shirt." I felt myself reverse direction, flying off the wall and across the store. I flailed painfully as I soared, managing to tip over one of the racks before colliding with the werewolf. I couldn't help but marvel at how soft he was as we hit the floor and slid into another rack, bringing its contents down on us. I always envisioned werewolf fur as being more coarse, I thought as I waited out the falling inventory. "Sorry, Jack. I muttered, rolling away from the werewolf and painfully climbing to my feet. Cool if I call you Jack. Never caught your actual name. Jack growled, shaking his head like a wet dog. I don't know why you have to make me hurt your friends before you tell me what I want to know, Butch. You know how much it pains me to hurt innocent bystanders. Butch was levitating over the cash register, his limbs shaking violently as he appeared to reflexively attempt to swallow his own tongue. I started grabbing anything within reach and throwing it at AZ. I managed to score a direct hit with a tea kettle and an old computer mouse, but it was the lawn dart directly to the head that finally got his attention. Butch took in a raspy breath and fell to the ground as AZ's head spun around to glare at me. His hand shot up, and I felt my windpipe close. My hands instinctively went to my neck as I tried desperately to take in air. Idiot child, rasped AZ, his eyes appearing a dull red as the edges of my vision began to darken. Do you have any idea who you're? I lost the rest of his sentence as Jack launched himself into AZ, and the two of them flew into another rack. I fell to my knees, sucking in air and letting the world come back into focus. It sounded like Jack got one or two good swipes in with his vicious-looking claws before he flew backwards again, crashing through one of the doors at the back of the store. What lay beyond remained unknown, as the door immediately reformed behind him, pulling back in its shattered wood until no trace of damage remained. AZ's head came bobbing into sight over the racks. I got back to my feet. This whole lack of fear thing was really starting to grow on me. You can force choke me all you want, Vader. I snarled at him. We both know you're just a whiny little sand-hating bitch. AZ's face was filled with fury as he raised his hand to smite me again. Suddenly Butch stepped between us, the Chekhov gun leveled squarely at AZ's head. AZ's look turned to one of contempt, but his hand still lowered slightly. How many of those bullets are you down to, Butch? He asked. 2. 3. Are you really sure you want to waste one on little old me? What, then, will you use on the one he sends after me? Or the one after that? Eventually, the big man himself will want to come. Better hope you still have at least one left for him. My eyes fell on another gun that had fallen onto the floor in the struggle, one that I had noticed on my first walk through of the aisles. A stupid idea popped into my head. I reached down and grabbed it, cocking it loudly as I leveled it towards AZ. Step aside, Butch, I growled. Butch shot a look back at me, saw what I held, and gave me a tight grin as he lowered the Chekhov gun and stepped out of my way. I squeezed the trigger on the Super Soaker XP100 and sent a stream of water directly into AZ's face. His scream was piercing as the smoke immediately started pouring off his melting face. I stepped towards him, continuously pumping more water as I adjusted my stream to any piece of exposed skin his squirming left exposed. The power of Christ compels you, bitch. I yelled as I stood over him, furiously pumping the squirt gun. Don't fuck with retail workers. Flesh fell from the demon's bones like really good barbecue ribs, bubbling into vapor from the floor. His screams became so high-pitched that I heard a few of the more delicate glass items in the shop shatter. I didn't let up on the stream of water until the plastic toy lost pressure and dribbled to a stop. AZ collapsed, his clothes falling into a pile on the floor as his body steamed away. I stood panting, feeling the adrenaline burning off my skin. My shoulder, forgotten during the fight, began to throb painfully, and the squirt gun slipped from my grasp. Did you seriously just use a Pulp Fiction line on me? I looked up at Butch in surprise and started to laugh. I mean, how often am I really going to have an opportunity like that? I just couldn't resist. He chuckled along with me. How'd you know that Super Soaker would work? You made it pretty easy to figure out what he was with all that boss's rebellion talk. And I thought with the kind of shit you have in here, there was a pretty decent chance that thing was filled with holy water. Anyway, if it wasn't, I knew you'd probably just look at me like I was an idiot and shoot him with the Chekhov gun instead. So, what the hell? He chuckled again and walked over to me to examine my shoulder. How's it look? I asked through gritted teeth. I mean, you're going to need stitches, probably, but I don't think you're going to bleed out anytime soon. I nodded, then glanced over at the back of the shop towards the door Jack had disappeared through. Is he going to be all right? I asked. Jack, he replied. Yeah, he'll be fine. He's a pretty solid guy, has friends everywhere. I'm sure someone over there will put him up until he finds his way back. Holy shit, his name really is Jack. I thought I was just being clever. Nobody knows his real name, actually. He doesn't talk much. But most people end up landing on that joke eventually, so it's kind of just stuck. Ow. My self-esteem. I deadpanned. What's over there? Over where? You said someone over there will put him up. What's over there? Oh, that door leads to the back rooms. It opens up somewhere different every time, so you usually have to find another way back if you go through it. I nodded, not really understanding, but increasingly distracted by the radiating pain in my shoulder. Well, let me know next time you see him. I think I owe that guy a beer. Next question. Where is the nearest hospital? He grinned. Come on, I'll patch you up. Gotten pretty good at it over the years, working this job. Only lost a couple dozen patients. I nodded, and followed as he led to another door behind the cash register. He stopped with his hand on the knob. Oh, and remember how I was trying to figure out why you ended up finding this place? I think I figured it out. Want a job? I looked at him. I thought about the banshee and the monkey's paw and the werewolf and the demon. Then I thought about the long series of dead-end, boring jobs I'd had up until this point. Do you have a dental plan? My third week working at House found me shoveling harpy shit. The filthy birds used their horrifically scarred, twisted, and just generally unattractive human heads to hurl insults at me as the sweat dripped down my face. Cleaning this particular cage was always rough, as the dirty hybrids took a great deal of joy in trying to add to the mess faster than I could clean it. My poop cart was half full of a variety of dung, having already cleaned out the unicorn, chupacabra, thunderbird, and yeti cages. I'm not sure exactly what bizarre combination of chemistry and magic was happening, but somehow the scent emanating from the cart reminded me of quality chicken parmesan. Hey cocksucker, liking that smell? Want a taste from the source? Screeched Blanche from high above me. The four disgusting creatures laughed raucously and started lobbing down additional work for me to enjoy. Rose fluttered down to stare at me. If you're going to be doing but stuff with us, you're going to need some lube. And she spat directly at my face. I swung up my pitchfork to block, the spittle immediately sizzling through one of the tines and dripping to the straw-covered floor. Rose, I said sternly, if you ruin my equipment, I'm just going to head back to the thrift shop, and you can spend the next week swimming in compost. Rose snorted at me and flapped her way back up the perches where her sisters sat chortling. I slipped back on my headphones to drown out the screeching vitriol and continued with my chores. Internally, I reminded myself that I was still in my training period, which, much like many of my previous jobs, mostly consisted of doing all the work that Butch didn't want to do. Still, though, I thought as I used the remaining part of the pitchfork to lift another load of rancid harpy shit, this was better than working at Denny's. Despite the intrinsically unpleasant nature of the cleanup, I genuinely enjoyed spending time in the menagerie. 10-year-old me had been utterly obsessed with cryptids, so getting the opportunity to crawl into a large pen and cuddle with a couple dozen jackalopes was kind of a dream come true. Not to mention the weekly poker games with the centaurs. I had doubled my first paycheck when I realized they were incapable of understanding the concept of bluffing. Half an hour later, and I could finally walk across the harpy cage and actually feel the firmness of the floor beneath my feet. Exhaling explosively, I pulled the wheelbarrow out of the cage, locked the door behind me, and leaned tiredly against the bars. I allowed my eyes to wander around the store as I tried to will my muscles into relaxation. Much like the thrift shop, the menagerie seemed to have been organized by an utter madman. Large beasts were housed next to tiny, predators next to prey, those capable of speech across from those who mostly just roared or screeched. The only exception was the largest animals, dragons, mammoths, the bipolar cyclops, etc., who were all held by the far west wall where the ceiling was highest. A soft bell rang as a customer entered. I stabbed the pitchfork into the pile of waste, pulled off my headphones, and began walking towards the front to make myself available. Behind me, Dorothy made a comment on my backside that would have been flattering from anyone else, and sent another bomb through the bars to splatter at my feet. I was fully prepared to launch into a formal retail greeting, but my words caught in my throat as I saw who had entered. Dark hair, full lips, green-gray eyes that pierced through every defense I possessed, a low-cut blouse that presented a couple very convincing reasons to break eye contact. This woman's beauty was otherworldly. Actually, considering the nature of most of my clientele, otherworldly was probably more literal than literary. She smiled at me, and I forgot my standard greeting, my name, and how to breathe. Hey there, new guy, she purred softly. King illegal forest to pig wild kill in it is, I responded wittily. She blinked. Well, that one's new. Excuse me for a moment. I turned and walked over to the barrel full of coconut rum I had prepared to feed the rugru and dunked my head in, taking in a few large mouthfuls. I re-emerged dripping cold and a little queasy from the taste. Let me try that again, I said. Nothing like a full immersion in alcohol to help talk to a woman way out of your league. Hi, welcome to Hal's low-cost menagerie. My name's Clear. How can I help you? The woman smiled broadly. I must say, you handled that better than a lot of men. A lot of things get easier once a guy embraces his own idiocy. What brings you in today? Ingredients, food, or companionship? I actually just needed to have a word with Butch. Is he around? Butch should be covering the counter in the thrift shop. If you wanted to look around for a bit, I can run and grab him for you. Maybe in a minute. It's been a long time since I've been in this part of the shop. She stepped forward and looped her arm with mine. And since this is the section I walked into, I think the shop wants us to get acquainted. Goosebumps raised instantly on the part of her arm that touched mine, which immediately brought up a twinge of nervous suspicion. Butch had insisted that I reverse my monkey paw wish, quite understandably of the opinion that fear was absolutely necessary to keep oneself from doing something idiotically reckless in an environment like Hal's. We worked on the wording of the wish for a ridiculously long time to restore my fear. Allow me to function while afraid without crapping my pants, and to avoid any comically ironic twists. It seemed to work out pretty well, although I had noticed that the more scared I became, the more I would impulsively make sardonic comments. Butch didn't seem to notice that part, since it fit my personality like a glove. I led the distractingly beautiful woman through the dank maze of cages, allowing her to direct the duration spent admiring each of the animals. She had obviously been around the mythical block a few times, since she barely seemed impressed by some of the more commonplace residents like the chimeras and the Jersey Devils. She hurried past the harpy cages as the four of them immediately began to harmonize in a repetitive chant of horror. But she did fall instantly in love with the three-headed quokkas. Brushing off my warnings, I had seen a few of the more mature ones let out small belches of fire. She released my arm and climbed directly into the pen with them, laying down and allowing them to curiously climb over her while she laughed delightedly. Oh, I love these, she exclaimed. What are they? They were just discovered a couple weeks ago. We decided to call them Chalamay's. Chalamay's? Yeah, because they're cute, but also kind of off-putting. She laughed again, as one of them began to shimmy its body down the front of her blouse. I sternly told myself that it was ridiculous to be jealous of a rodent. The woman rose gracefully back to her feet, the Chalamet still nestled comfortably between her breasts. Two of its heads were sticking out of the top of her shirt, looking around gleefully. The third seemed to have fallen asleep against the swell of her cleavage. Lucky jerk. I guess I've been chosen, she declared, climbing carefully out of the pen. This little guy's coming home with me. The pets pick the owners, I agreed. We can get you checked out in the thrift shop if you still needed to talk to Butch, Ms. Babs. I was incredibly confused for a moment, because the voice that spoke her name was not the dulcet music she had used before, but rather masculine and gruff and gravelly. Also, it seemed to be coming from behind me. Butch was standing next to the Kelpie stalls. His customary scowl had descended into a disgusted grimace. Babs gave him a smile that would have lit up a cemetery, but Butch didn't soften so much as a werewolf's hair. I thought we agreed that it would be best if you stayed away from the shop, Butch said, his voice dangerous. I thought that was more of a suggestion, Babs entreated. I didn't think you had actually trespassed me. That suggestion was based off the assumption that you didn't want to see me any more than I wanted to see you. Butch, come on, don't be like that. It's been, 50 years since the last time we saw each other. Think for a minute. Would I stay away that long only to show up now if it wasn't important? Why do you have a Chalamet between your tits? Babs crossed her hands across her chest protectively. Even someone like me needs an emotional support animal, Butch. Get a harpy then. You'd have more in common. I knew it was you who got them to call me that. I started laughing uncontrollably. Butch and Babs paused their fighting to stare at me. Butch, you absolute rascal. I chortled. You never told me you used to be married. It's not often that you get to witness an actual miracle, so I made sure to relish every second that I was able to see Butch blush. Babs suddenly became very occupied scratching a basilisk behind its ear. My shit-eating grin stayed on my face as I forced a big hug on Butch. Man, she is way too hot for you. What, are you actually rich or something? Is this the part where I ask for a raise? Or hang on, was it a physical thing? Wait here, I'm gonna go get a ruler. Butch pulled away angrily. Clear, is there any way I can convince you to just not be yourself right now? Not a chance, DeMarco. You know I have a terminal case of not knowing when to shut up. So, I sat down on the wheelbarrow full of dung and leaned back comfortably, my stomach growling at the smell. How did you two meet? Also, Babs, does that mean you're single now? The look Butch gave me was disgusted. I returned it with an impish grin. You really have no concept of appropriate, do you, Clear? We work in a second-hand shop. This is kinda what we do. Butch sighed and Babs tried unsuccessfully to suppress a smile. I think I like this one, Butch, she told him. Yeah, you would. Maybe you should just tell me why you're here, Butch said to her. I'm not sure if I have the energy to play around today. Well, that sounds familiar. Babs, come on. Babs' grin flickered and fell. Butch, Hal's been hiding out at my place for the last few months. He went missing yesterday. Butch's face didn't change, but he did fall silent. Babs seemed to be silently pleading with him to hear her out, and he was obviously considering it. Finally, he glanced over at me. Clear, I think we need a couple minutes. The BKs just got in with a new shipment. Will you go sign them in and restock, please? There were times to joke, and there were times to just leave people to their conversation. I had a hard time telling the difference sometimes, or most of the time, but I had learned that when Butch asked politely, it was probably for the best to just follow his lead. I nodded silently, and made my way to the elevator at the back of the menagerie. In the elevator, I took a moment to consider the whole conversation I had just witnessed. Hal had been staying with Butch's ex-wife? That actually made a lot of sense. I knew Hal and Butch had been pretty famously tight, so the last place anyone would have expected Hal to go would be Butch's ex-wife. And what did that mean for Babs? Butch was one of the most formidable people I knew, but even he had spoken of Hal with a bit of awe. If Hal went to Babs for protection, God only knows what she must be capable of. Honestly, it probably meant she was exactly my type, i.e. a really bad idea. No, I wasn't really going to try to hook up with her, tempting though it may be. But she did strike me as someone who would play along with my attempts to get a rise out of Butch. I shook myself out of my thoughts and pressed the TC button on the panel. I felt the slowly becoming familiar lurch in my stomach. My hand instinctively reached out to brace myself against the wall as the tiny room began racing off to the left. That surprised the hell out of me the first time I'd ridden this thing. I had tried to figure out how any of it was possible at first, but pretty quickly decided I liked not having a migraine more. The elevator entered its cruising speed, so I placed my hand on the other wall to prepare for the equally jarring deceleration. While I waited, my eyes scanned down the button panel again. There were 6 of them. Well, 9 if you count the door open / door close / we're all gonna die buttons. Besides the TC where I was going and the M from where I'd just been, there were also buttons for FDR Fine Dining Restaurant, LHR Love Hotel, and one actually managed to fit in Bozek, the Blood Orgy Suite and Event Center. The final button was at the bottom, and it just said D. Butch hadn't told me what that one went to, just to never go down there unless Satan himself was on my tail. I had decided that it was prudent to take him at his word on that one. I felt my weight shift towards my bracing hand. I tried not to think about how far I had traveled in the last 3 minutes. I hadn't stepped outside from the menagerie exit yet, but I knew the restaurant opened just outside Brussels, and that trip only took about 1:30. The elevator ground to a halt, and the doors opened to the thrift store. No customers, fortunately. Butch had assured me that stealing from the place was impossible, but even in the supernatural realms, customers became pissy when they had to wait. The BKs were not customers, though, so they just had to put up with waiting. 4 of them stood next to the front counter, 3 boys and 1 girl. A pallet with several layers of boxes was floating about 6 inches off the ground next to them. As usual, their faces were identical and expressionless. Their blonde hair was cut in the same early Beatles bowl cut. Their eyes were the same deep black voids. "About time, asshole," the tallest of them grumbled. It always amused me that despite their appearance, they always sounded like middle-aged teamsters. "Deepest apologies, my tallest," I intoned mournfully while dipping into a florid bow. Standing back up, I slipped back into my normal speech. "Seriously though, I'm really not. I was watching Butch meet up with the ex he hasn't seen in 50 years. Believe me, totally worth it." The tallest snorted. Babs is back, huh? That poor guy. She's had centuries of experience manipulating men like him. Hey, I'm still new here. This was the first I'd heard of her. You guys want to fill me in on some backstory? The girl shook her head. Not our business, kid. We deal in inventory, not gossip. Union rules. Nothing wrong with a little idle conversation, Munchkin. Call me that again, and you'll lose a finger. I believe you, short stuff. Come on. I just want to know how large the pile of shit I'm standing in is. Another of the boys blew out a breath. Look, we really don't pay much attention. She was here a lot, and then she wasn't. I know she worked for meth, so she spent most of her time down in the restaurant. I blinked in surprise. Didn't see that coming. Whatever, I'm pretty sure most of us have a past we're not so proud of. And working in the restaurant would make sense if she was on meth. The tallest spoke again. Quit thinking like an idiot, clear. METH, monsters for the ethical treatment of humans. Babs used to make sure the people they served down in the restaurant were treated humanely, and that they didn't suffer unnecessarily during the slaughtering process. Oh, nice, she struck me as the humanitarian sort. Any idea why they split? Butch's old assistant kept on jokingly flirting with her, so Butch killed him. Oh fuck, really? No, not really. Now will you please sign the damn paperwork, so we can get back to work? I grabbed the outstretched clipboard, signed my name at the bottom, and handed it back. The tallest tore off the receipt copy, and handed it back to me. The four of them walked in lockstep out of the door, as I turned to begin the unloading process. Curious as I was about what Butch and Babs were talking about, I had to admit that this was my favorite part of the job. The paperwork identified this as estate sale procurements, which meant a 50-50 chance of it being junk or awesome. The BKs were good at picking out items of significance, but a well-loved children's toy or a serial killer's trophy collection had a tendency to set off that same bell in their heads. I was met with disappointment for the first 8 boxes. Well, mostly. I did find myself spending an inordinate amount of time studying a fascinating painting of what appeared to be a Soviet-era army marching across an ocean with the silhouette of the Golden Gate Bridge barely visible in the background. A pot of fish painted with the Soviet flag swam about the advancing army's feet. I decided to hang it behind the cash register so I could study it more in depth later. There was definitely something to it, since it took every ounce of concentration to pull my eyes off of it. I struck gold on the 9th box, where I found a translated copy of the Voynich manuscript, an unabridged version of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, 12 missing books of Homer, one of which was titled, That Time Achilles and Odysseus Totally Boned. A strange red hat that smelled like sulfur-flavored ambergrease and looked like it was perpetually coated with sand, and a small bow complete with arrow-filled quiver that all appeared to be plated in gold. Pulling out one of the arrows, I noticed that they seemed to be quite intentionally phallic. I quickly double-checked everything in the box off the inventory list the BKs gave me and set it aside for Butch set prices. I found a few other decent items scattered through the rest of the boxes, but I handled them myself due to us having very similar items already in stock. Mass-produced grimoires, a few tarot decks, a couple haunted toys, a number of enchanted pieces of clothing, things like that. At the bottom of the final box, since that's how these things always go for some reason, I found trouble. The moment I picked up the forest green book with High Clear, written in Comic Sans on the front cover, I knew there was no way anything good could come of it. But of course, I immediately said, "Hi book. Nice to meet you," and opened it. The first line of the first page simply read, "Ha, you fucking idiot," and it began to glow red hot in my hands. I dropped it, since I had completely ignored the MOSHA requirements of protective equipment when handling untested magical artifacts. On the floor, the book flipped its pages towards the center and began to emit a bubble of green light. "Oh god damn it!" I yelled, and quickly ran behind the register to grab the canister of pure salt we kept under the counter for situations like this. I managed to get a circle drawn around the book just before the bubble burst and a giant, hideous, praying mantis-looking thing flew directly at me. It hit the barrier with a dull thud, looked down at the circle of salt, and hissed audibly. I let out an audible breath as my heart pounded away in my chest. It twisted its arms and waved them in front of its face, immediately transforming into a woman with short red hair and piercing eyes. The wings stayed in place, though, flapping softly to keep her aloft and looking down in contempt at me. "Release me," she whispered fiercely at me. I stared back at her, wanting to think she was cute, but unable to get her insect form far enough out of my head to consider it. I know there is much we can learn from each other if we can negotiate a truce. We can find a way to coexist. Can there be a peace between us? Peace? No peace. Release me now. Man, Butch said you guys didn't have a sense of humor, but you just rolled with that one straight away. Rolled with what, human? I said release me this instant. Wait, you mean those scriptwriters actually came up with realistic dialogue for that scene? Huh, who would have thunk it? She threw up her hands. Why must I always be caught by humans who make no sense? I think that might say more about you than me, sweetie. The yellow door at the far end of the shop burst open, and a tall, lanky fellow covered in red-brown fur casually strolled in. "Jack!" I yelled enthusiastically. So far as I knew, nobody had laid eyes on him since he disappeared through that door on my first day. Jack sauntered over to me and gave me a fist bump before clapping me on the shoulder with camaraderie. He glanced up at the fairy briefly, who bared a mouthful of razor-sharp teeth at him. He flipped her off in return. "Where you been?" "Butch told me you'd be okay," but I was started to get a little worried. Jack reached into a pocket of fur and withdrew a small business card to hand over. In a small typeset, it simply said the Backrooms. I flipped it over to see a small description of the itsy-bitsy teeny-weeny multiversal in-betweeny. Yep, that definitely clears it all up. He grinned at me. "Well, let me buy you a drink down in the restaurant before you head out tonight. I definitely owe you one." He nodded at me. Then he shot a questioning glance up at the fairy trapped in her circle of salt. "I have no idea. Butch told me how to trap her, but not what to do with her after. Any thoughts?" Jack shrugged and fired a fingered gun at her. "That's a thought. It's iron rounds for fairies, right?" Since I had absolutely no idea where Butch kept the iron bullets, it was probably for the best that he chose that moment to come through the elevator door. "What's all this then?" he asked, taking in the scene with a bewildered look. "Jack!" yelled Babs from behind Butch with delight. She ran towards him and launched herself into his surprised embrace, burying her face into his fur. The Chalamet squeezed out from between them and scrambled up to the top of Jack's head, chittering in annoyance. Ever so slowly, I watched as Jack and Babs began to lose balance and tip backwards. It probably would have resulted in everyone sharing a good-natured laugh at their expense if they didn't fall directly onto the salt line. The fairy wasted no time flipping straight back into her praying mantis form and flying straight at me. I managed to duck underneath of her just before impact, but her back talons managed to swipe against my raised forearm, drawing a thin line of blood. She quickly made for the front door, but a quick shout of "Hey Siri, set Fey protection wards" from Butch blocked her exit with a cross of bright purple lines. She spun on us furiously, her face darting around the shop for another way out. Babs and Jack were pulling themselves back to their feet, but Butch was already in action, running through an aisle with his hands deftly swiping items off the shelves. "Clear, get the salt ready," Butch shouted at me. Sensing that he was probably the largest threat in the room, the fairy went for Butch next. He slid to a stop at the end of the aisle and stood his ground. When she got close enough to him for Babs to let out a yell of concern, Butch reached into his pocket and threw a cloud of powder into her face. They must have been iron fillings or something, because she immediately shrieked and started trying to claw it out of her eyes. Butch moved in closer, an iron bar in his hand ready to finish her off, but one of her flailing wings caught him in the head and sent him sprawling. She shook her insectal face, and her reddened eyes fell on me, standing in front of the cash register holding the bag of salt. Jack and Babs came at her from either side, but a powerful flap of her wings sent them flying. I stared dumbly at her as she began to race straight at me, her face filled with rage. I looked around helplessly for anything within reach that might help me in this fight. The Chekhov gun was too far away, nothing nearby was made with iron. Really the only thing within reach that might work was... I grabbed the painting of the Soviet army walking on water and held it up between me and the charging Fey. The impact never came. I lowered the painting just enough for me to look over the top and saw her examining the painting while tapping her chin thoughtfully with her long, thin tarsi. "Interesting," she said. "Is this intended as a Cold War propaganda piece? If so, which side is it for? A warning for the West or an aspiration for the East?" I'm not sure, I replied, calmly walking around the counter and pretending to contemplate the painting while surreptitiously beginning to reform the salt circle around her. I thought at first that it was just a depiction of some kind of Orwellian future, but now I'm starting to wonder if it's something way more insidious. This might actually be an original Alexander Samokhvalov, she said, fascinated. I don't actually know, we just got it in. I haven't had a chance to get it officially appraised yet. If you're interested, though, we might be able to make a deal. I stepped back and sprinkled the last bit of salt in the bag onto the completed circle. With a quick motion, I reached over and pulled the painting away, breaking her line of sight. Dismay filled her eyes as she looked down to realize she was trapped again. "Fuck me," she groaned. "Sorry," I said. "Really not interested when you're still in that skin. If you want to switch back to the redhead, though, we could talk about it." The fairy shot me a dirty look, but shifted back to her human form anyway. "If that is the cost of my freedom, I'll do what I must do." EW. No, I was kidding. Sorry, I have a lot of perversions, but formicophilia is not on the list. How do you know what it is called then? I really don't have a good answer to that. I Google random things when I'm bored. Then name your desire, human, and allow me to return to my realm. Butch, Babs, and Jack had joined me around the circle at this point, and the two former lovers were exchanging a pointed look. "Weirdly enough, kid, your fuck-up might have some unexpected benefits here. Babs and I were just coming to talk to you about it, actually. We need to track down Hal. This shop is in some serious trouble if the Hellspawn managed to get a hold of him. He was safe over with Babs, but now that he's vanished again, we really need to do something about this." He looked over at the trapped fairy. "How about that? Can you bring Hal to us?" "You did not trap me, shopkeeper. My deal is not with you." Butch looked at me. "All you kid. Think you're ready to go solo." I smiled at him. I was born ready. It was pretty satisfying that I even got Jack to let out an exasperated groan with that one. "All right, babe, what do you think? Can you bring Hal back to us?" The fairy's eyes went distant. "No. He has been shielded against interference by fairy magic. I don't know how, but I cannot touch him." "Well, shit. How about information? Can you tell us anything about him?" She nodded. 3 questions, 3 true answers, and you'll give me my freedom? Fine, but no bullshit answers, okay? No technically true, but only because homonyms exist, answers, and nothing so cryptic that it only makes sense after we're done, you got me? Also, once you give us the answers and I break the circle, you can't hurt any of us for trapping you. Agreed. I will speak only the full truth, and we shall all depart unharmed. All right. Where is Hal? What is the quickest way for us to get to him? And what will we need to do in order to successfully find him and bring him back? She closed her eyes briefly, as if scanning her hard drive. He is currently hiding in purgatory. The blue door at the back of the shop will bring you to the realm. But then you take the subway to Terrace 5 and catch the bus to the historical district. Once there, you must have with you a servant of heaven, a denizen of hell, and a man perpetually trapped in the mortal realm. Between the 4 of you, you will be able to track down a social media influencer who goes by the name of Razzmatazz, who will guide you to Hal. I cannot tell whether you will succeed in convincing him to return. The uncertainty that surrounds him is too deep to see clearly. But all other paths lead to certain failure. Bear in mind, these instructions are intended for you alone. If these others decide to leave you behind, these answers may no longer be truthful. All right, that'll have to do. Thank you, gorgeous. And I broke the salt circle with my foot. The fairy immediately vanished with a crack of lightning. The 4 of us looked at each other for a moment. "That was uncharacteristically straightforward for you, Clear," Butch said, sounding slightly impressed. That whole screwing up the 3 questions trope has been done to death. I didn't think there was anything more I could add to it, so what's the point?" "Well, strangely enough, we have most of our group already here," Babs commented. "All we need is a servant of heaven." "Wait, really?" I said, surprised. "Is Jack from Hell?" "No, I am," Babs replied. "My place is located in one of Hell's suburbs." "And the man trapped in the mortal realm?" Butch held to his hand. "Right here. I will be answering no follow-up questions." He looked over at Jack. "Hey buddy, glad you made it back okay. Any chance you'd be willing to keep an eye on the shop for a few days while we go drag the owner back?" Jack raised his hand and rubbed his thumb and forefinger together. "Of course. I'll give you double what I'm paying Clear. Wait, what the fuck? I yelped. Shut up, Clear, you're still in training. Is that cool, Jack? Jack gave him a thumbs up. Great. So all we need to do now is track down a servant of heaven, and we can get started. Right on cue, the front door opened and a fat, middle-aged guy walked in, naked except for a drooping sash. He had a toothpick sticking out from his teeth, and a tiny pair of soft white wings sticking out from his shoulder blades. Hey dudes, he said with a lecherous smile on his face. I just talked to a bunch of creepy kids who said you all might have my bow. A wide grin spread across my face. I think we might have what you're looking for, but technically speaking it's our bow now. His face began to turn angry, but I held up a calming hand. Let's not get off on the wrong foot, here. I'm sure we can make a deal. I'm Clear, by the way, it's good to meet you. He accepted my outstretched hand. You too, I suppose. I'm X-Mac. My grin grew 3 sizes that day. Of course you are. Hey, anyone else hungry? I'm fucking starving. Let's hit the restaurant before we get started. Horror is the most personal genre of stories that you can write. Romance, action, sci-fi all revolve around what the story itself contains. They are brief but concise descriptions of the piece of fiction that you're about to read. Horror, on the other hand, transcends the barrier of fiction and focuses on the feeling it gives the reader. That's when it gets personal. Horror is horror because it is supposed to affect you. There are levels of horror and perceptions that are just as different as our own DNA. For someone, Paranormal Activity might be just the scariest ever movie, and others might watch it as a bedtime story. An action movie fanatic will watch variants of the same movie for hours on end just for the adrenaline and fight scenes. A scary movie or story fanatic will change their taste, and the more they watch, the more immune they'll become. Do you remember Bloody Mary? I do. 4th grade me was terrified. Now I don't care that much. I've become desensitized to most stories and begun to notice patterns all stories have. Creepy house / doll / ritual, protagonist that says something like, "It will haunt me forever," entity, whatever. I get it. It's not the lack of originality that pisses me off, but the fact that it's just not scary anymore. Even if someone comes up with something new, some concept that hasn't been done before, it is lazily executed and the story itself is butchered and given a bleak ending, which enrages me. I can't write anything that doesn't scare me. I need to feel it too, to know if the story is good, since I have years of experience of reading horror and my tolerance is built up. If it manages to scare me, it will scare 90% of my readers. I figured I hadn't written a good story in a while, so I began searching for ideas. I picked on random things and concepts from around my house, garden, work, whatever, tried to find some twist to my day-to-day activities. Late at night, drinking a glass of water on the porch. What if something were to whistle, far in the darkness? Overdone. It would probably be followed up with some ominous ending, some creature or mimic. Driving home. What if the radio suddenly let out a warning to not go home? Aliens, mimics again, doppelgangers, pandemic. Again, not that scary. Would be interesting for a minute, then my readers would forget all about it. I just couldn't find anything that really intrigued me. I figured I'd just consumed too much horror, so I needed a break. I rented out a cabin in the woods and tried to go on a detox kind of thing, where I'd sit in silence for days, no TV, no phone, just me and the forest, so that my imagination would start working again. It was around the 3rd night of my stay, and silence was now imprinted in my mind, my movements, my dreams. I had imagined various scenarios of stories, but nothing satisfied me enough. A knock at the door pulled me out of my thoughts. I waited, thinking I must have imagined it. The house waited with me, ready and silent. The knock came again. I put one foot in front of the other and followed the sound to my front door. When I spoke, my voice sounded hoarse, almost unrecognizable. Yes, I have a package for you. Sorry? I have a package for you. Right. I don't live here. The owner doesn't come back until dash. No, this is for you. Reuben Hollis. I didn't order anything. You asked for inspiration. I tilted my head, staring at a random spot on the door. Inspiration? Was this one of my fans? Who are you, if you don't mind? The person didn't answer. The windows were beginning to darken their blue hue as night made its way to the cabin. Soon enough, Moonlight would begin to slide off the wooden furniture and wool rugs, dusty photo frames, and antiques. It was cold, but not cold enough to turn on the heating. Another uneventful night would follow. And yet, I wanted to open the door. So I did. The porch was empty, and a cardboard box was sitting in front of me, no labels, no nothing. The person had left. Now that I think about it, I can't remember whether it was a woman or a man's voice. I stared at the box for a while, afraid to step outside and take it. What if someone was waiting for me to do that, so they could sneak behind me? What if the dark trees concealed something even more sinister, watching me? I lifted my gaze to the alley. Yeah, I was afraid of, animals. At least, that's what I told myself. I lifted the box and shut the door behind me, locking it twice. Now I was sitting at the dining table with the box in front of me, debating whether to open it or not. I'd seen this before, and the possibilities of its contents were endless. It could have been a human head, photographs, an endless void, or a prank. Most likely. Yeah, a prank. Surely. I opened it like ripping off a band-aid, then looked away. Staring at the wall, I just couldn't pull myself to look inside. Finally, I turned slowly and peeked. Inside the box were a bunch of papers, of all sizes and origins. Photos, receipts, prints, envelopes. Should I touch them? Could I? What if they were dangerous or poisoned or laced or crime evidence that I was contaminating? Jesus, no one's out to get me. I should just calm down. I noticed the papers were grouped and stapled together. I lifted one of the groups. The first piece of paper had a name on it. Paula Salvador. I flipped through it and found a shopping receipt, an address and print screens of some user's activity online on multiple forums, with certain words and sentences highlighted and annotated. The last paper of this group had a few phrases scribbled in ink. When Paula was younger, she was out driving with her dad very early in the morning, and a horse jumped out and landed on their windshield, breaking it. Broken glass went into her legs, and the bloody scene remained imprinted on her for years. She is now afraid of horses, and she never sits in the passenger's seat anymore. I realized the extracts were laying out this random woman's life and pulling out her darkest secrets and fears for me to read. I put the group aside and picked another one from the hundreds still waiting in the box. I skimmed through it, then another, and another, until I'd covered about 10, some really disturbing, others mild, and yet intimate glimpses of the lives of strangers. Some of them contained weird, really specific fears. Ollie Higgins, afraid of being eaten by rats in a tight space. Jean Warner, afraid of AI eventually killing her. Ian Harold's, afraid of accidentally killing his mother. The papers were deeply personal, and I realized they practically contained cheat codes to scaring these people. Those were their weak points, their soft spots. That's when I remembered that horror was the most personal of genres, and my mind moved on to form another expected connection. What if I could combine these specific fears and situations and tailor stories to fit my readers? What makes an experience truly scary? The feeling of being known, of being seen. How personal it is. The more specific, the more unnerving. Imagine being Paula and scrolling to read a story about a horse attacking a car in the middle of the night. Makes your breath stop a little, doesn't it? That night, I turned on my laptop and began crafting the first of many stories. I tied together around 5 groups of papers, inserting weirdly specific things from the lives of these strangers and making it as ominous as I could. Then I posted it and went to sleep. The next day it had blown up. I scrolled and read the comments. That was weird and unsettling. Whoa. I never thought I'd see this trope executed like that. It's noon and I'm scared shitless. I fucking hate horses. This feels like someone reached inside my mind and pulled out one of my fears. Congrats, Opie. Really good story. I smiled, pride warming up my chest. I'd found the key to writing stories that latch onto the minds of my readers. I worked and worked, day and night. I'd counted the material in the box and found a total of 213 sets detailing fears and weaknesses. That would last me enough to really distinguish myself as a writer. The strangers I'd read about began appearing in the comment sections of their respective stories, admitting to how unsettled they felt while reading them. Soon enough, people began to notice me as a writer and not just a username that occasionally pops up with a story. Well done again, Ruben, I shit my pants. I can't wait for your next post, OMG. 3 months had passed, and my following doubled, then tripled, then doubled again. Soon enough, I got my first headline. Meet Ruben Hollis, the writer who knows you better than you know yourself. More stories followed, and I got my first book deal less than 6 months after receiving the package. Things were going really well, but I was running out of papers. I jokingly stated I had writer's block, but I knew that, once the very intricate studies of strangers' lives stopped fueling me, I'd run out of content. I booked another trip to that cabin and waited around, in hopes of another package arriving at my doorstep. In 3 days, the now familiar knock came again with a box, with its bearer nowhere to be seen. This went on for 3.5 years, a time where I published 4 books. As my supply ran out, I would book another trip to the cabin and wait for the visitor to drop off what I needed. I didn't know who they were, but I didn't care. My last trip to the cabin had me wait a bit longer for the package. When it finally came, I opened the box to find a single set of papers stapled together. Ruben Hollis. I rubbed my face and stretched my neck. The box was comically large, compared to the single stack of papers laying at the bottom. Somehow, I didn't want to read it. There wasn't anything I was afraid of. Over the past years, I'd written about every single fear a human being might have. There was nothing left for me. I decided I wouldn't read it. I didn't need to know. I took the papers and put them away, and left the next day. I knew that had been the last package, and I didn't want to push my luck, so I retired from writing and spent the next years living off the money I'd already made, completely forgetting about my own file. Last Wednesday, I heard a knock at the door. Yeah, you didn't use the contents of the last package. If you don't write the story, it has nowhere to go, so it haunts you. I retired. You have to write the story. Those are the rules. It wouldn't scare anyone but me. It's pointless. It's not pointless. This is something easier for you. Your last prompt. Then it slid something under my door. I stared at the crumpled piece of paper, then lifted it. The single sentence stared back at me. Ruben Hollis, afraid that the man behind his laptop is real. I shook my head, then threw away the paper. That's bullshit. I'm not afraid of that, I muttered to myself as I rummaged through drawers, searching the other papers. Ruben Hollis, afraid that the man behind his laptop is real. Ruben Hollis, afraid that the man behind his laptop is real. Ruben Hollis, afraid that the man behind his laptop is real. Ruben Hollis, afraid that the man behind his laptop is real. They all had the same fucking thing written onto them. That trope was so overused, I could never be afraid of it. Ever. Yeah, sometimes, when I was writing at night, I used to fear the darkness behind my laptop, but that was just my imagination. Nothing more, nothing less. Day and night, I thought of that sentence. For some reason, it refused to leave my brain. I didn't want to write the story, because that would have made me think about a setting, a protagonist, a plot, which would have carved it into my mind forever. There was no man behind my laptop. This morning, I found a note inside my pocket. It simply said the man is real now, but it's not a man. My heart twisted and my chest tensed up. My stomach felt empty, as if drained from all the blood. My head flooded with thoughts. The papers don't work. And yet, they scared my readers. They were accurate, specific. Mine wasn't specific, which is what makes it scarier. It's just a story. Write it. No, now it's too late. Ruben Hollis, afraid that the man behind his laptop is real. It can't be too late. I remembered how I got the packages. I knew it was unnatural, and yet I didn't question it. I just accepted the offer. Was it too late now to pay the price? Write my own horror story. How hard can it be? The readers that had their fears immersed into my writing didn't have anything happen to them. I mean, I don't think they did. I never checked on them. I would have known, right? If their fears had come true. I didn't care. I never cared. I just wanted to scare them. I didn't care to find out how their weaknesses had gotten into the box, or what happened after I'd pulled them out and written them. I liked scaring people, but the writer was never supposed to be the one scared or studied. I was merely a vessel. This should not happen. I wanted to get this over with, so I started writing. I had this idea to cheat on the rules. Since they hadn't explicitly stated how to incorporate the prompt into my writing, I just wrote exactly what had happened until this very point. That's a story, right? From time to time, I'd glance at the 2 notes on my desk. Ruben Hollis, afraid that the man behind his laptop is real. The man is real now, but it's not a man. I finished it with some generic, it was all in my head thing, then posted it. I wrote it with the night on, so that the darkness behind my laptop would not creep me out. Relief washed over me as I refreshed the page and saw the upvotes coming in. I glanced at the 3 notes on my desk. 3? Wait. No, 2. I put 2 pieces of paper out there, and yet another one had been placed on top of them. Hello. Close your laptop. A sudden wave of dizziness hit me, my ears ringing from the tension. There was no way I'd close that laptop and look. I leaned back a little. I could see under the table, and my eyes widened, my breath scarce, as I stared at the pair of ghastly feet crouched behind. I didn't blink for so long, my eyes teared up. I was not going to move. Ever. I didn't know what to do, but I just figured I'd stall a bit. From behind my laptop screen, a long, dirty and bony finger reached out and pressed the off button of my laptop.